Greetings and welcome to another Storytime with Thisbe. Today is actually going to be a little bit different than usual. As you can see, my setup is a little bit different than usual, but I hope that you'll stay with me and that you'll enjoy it anyway. The story I'm going to tell you tonight is The Cock of Barcelos, and that's not dirty for any of you folk that might think it is. This is actually a medieval story, and it is the first bardic piece that I ever learned to tell at a bardic circle. I'm going to need you to use your imagination, just like when we were telling Beetle and the Bard, which I will be telling again. But close your eyes. Enjoy the story. Picture what it must have been. Once upon a time, in Portugal, in this tiny little village called Barcelos, a terrible thing happened. Now, they really don't like to talk about what this terrible thing is. Some people said it was a murder, some people said it was but it was a small town and news gets around quickly. It just so happens that during this terrible thing, a man was passing through town. He was a traveler, off on his own mission, exploring the world, yada yada. And of course, naturally, with everybody gossiping, busybodying up and around, he was curious about what was going on. So he asked the baker what's happening, and the baker wouldn't tell him. And he asked the butcher what was happening, the butcher, he wouldn't tell him. Stranger, as you know, can be dangerous. But it just so happened that the more questions he asked, the more suspicious he became to the population. And so the population, slowly but surely, through gossip, through speaking with your neighbors, they decided that he was the guilty party who committed the, very terrible thing. And the stranger, he had no way of convincing them that that wasn't true. He had no alibi. He had no friends here. And so the butcher said, "Oh, yes, it was definitely him." And the baker said, "Oh, yes, it was definitely him." And so it was that the judge convicted him of the terrible thing. Unfortunately, the crime for the terrible thing was death. But, luckily for our dear traveler, he had a few days before the gallows. So, on the evening before he was about to be hung, he asked for one last favor. "Please," he said to the guards, "let me plead my case to the judge. What harm can it do? I am innocent." And the guards, having been around him for a few days, they decided that he's an okay guy. What harm really can it do? So they marched him up the top of the hill where the judge's house was. And the judge was having a party, a wonderful feast. There was roasted meats and vegetables and salads, anything you can imagine. But the center of this feast was a big, beautiful chicken. A rooster, all made up with feathers intact, as is one of the medieval ways of preparing food, just to make it look a little bit fancy. And our traveler, he came in before the judge, and he begged the judge to listen. He said, "I am innocent. I have not committed this crime." And the judge laughed. "Of course you have committed this crime. The butcher says you have committed this crime, and the baker says you have committed this crime, and everyone in the village believes you have committed this crime, and so you are not innocent." But the traveler looked around desperately, trying to find anything he could grip onto, and he looked at that rooster and he said, "If I am guilty, then let me die this night. But if I am telling the truth, then this rooster before you will crow louder than you can imagine, and this rooster will tell you that I am innocent." And everyone laughed. They laughed loudly, and the villager, he was dragged off to the gallows. But just before he was about to be hung, just before his death was about to be imminent, the rooster crowed. And it could be heard throughout the village, throughout the mountains. And the man smiled as the rope was dropped. And so it was that he laid a statue in that town in honor of the rooster that saved his life. Thank you for joining me.